Am I driving?
Yes, sir.
No, I'm not. I'm traveling.
Articles of Confederation, you can look it up. It's in the United States Book of Codes. It is your laws you have to follow.
Help! 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 Call the police! Call them.
Sure, we are the police.
No. Let me ask you, am I being detained?
Yeah.
Yes, you're being detained. It's obvious, isn't it?
I got you.
Yeah, I will defend my brothers, I will defend the weak. I will pursue and fight evil so others may sleep. I am the sheepdog, protecting the night. Wolf hunters unite, bring it on. It's time to fight.
What's up, guys? Mike the Cop. And if you follow my channel, you know that I posted recently on the community page that I felt like I've been a little bit of a creative slump lately. I have like these moments of creativity, but I felt like for a long time it was kind of like I had no shortage of ideas and things to put out for content, and now I just have felt like I've been dragging a lot. But I've also been traveling more and doing some different things than I used to do in my role as Mike the Cop. But nonetheless, I looked back at some old spreadsheets of ideas and found a few topics that I think, they'll work. So this one is, when do you have to show ID to the cops? It's actually I don't get that question, it seems like, as much anymore, but I used to get it a lot, and I never really did a video on it, so here we go. Actually had a couple of cops stop by the studio today, and we were talking about this. Surprisingly, there is no sort of like one-size-fits-all answer to this. We have, on one side, really clear times when you're required by law to provide identification, and then on the other side, you have really clear times where you don't need to provide identification, but there's a whole lot in the middle where it depends. So let's talk about the very clear side of the most common ones. And there might be situations where I'm not thinking of, or you have a follow-up question to. Definitely drop them in the comments. I'll be active in there and try to get your question, or somebody who's a law enforcement officer or who has knowledge of this can answer your question. First, when you are the driver of a vehicle.
No, I'm not. I'm traveling.
And there is a lawful traffic stop conducted, you are required to provide identification. No ifs, no ands, no buts. If you're driving a vehicle, you're required to have a driver's license. This is by law. Yes, this is for all you sovereign citizens out there, you free inhabitants, you Articles of Confederation, you're traveling, not driving, all that other nonsense. You are required by law to have a driver's license if you are operating a motor vehicle.
Even for non-commercial purposes.
And that's pretty much common sense. However, a lot of people ask, well, what if you're the passenger? Do you have to give ID if you are the passenger? If you are in the passenger seat of a car and you are suspected of violating a law or a traffic law, then you may be required. So for example, did you toss a cigarette butt out the window if that's illegal in your state? Did you litter out the window? Are you wearing your seat belt? There are instances in which, even though you are the passenger in a vehicle, the vehicle may be getting stopped because of something you have done or not done. So yes, you might be required as a passenger. Vehicles are often involved in some type of criminal investigation, and that's where it sort of falls into the gray category. So I'm going to come back to that. So I'm not done talking about vehicle stops, but we're going to have to table it. Another clear area would be jaywalking, for example. It is a violation. It's a civil infraction. It's not necessarily like this misdemeanor or felony crime. But if you are involved in a civil infraction of any kind, then yes, if you're going to be issued a citation, or they're going to consider whether they're going to give you a citation or not, if you are stopped for a legal reason, then you are required to provide identification, even if it's the violation of a civil infraction. Border stops. It's another example where if you are requested to provide ID, you are required to provide that identification. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. That's the way it is, and yes, you're required to give it. Another very clear way is during the course of a criminal investigation. So let's say, for example, that you have just been involved in an assault on another person, and the officers show up and say, provide your information, ID. Now, in this case, we're not talking about necessarily the small piece of plastic is what's being required. It is the information that's on there, your name, date of birth, identifying information, so that you can be put into the system, or you can be checked in the system as part of a criminal investigation. If you are subject to that, you are required to provide identification. If you have been arrested for a crime, you are required to provide identification for the booking process. Some point in that criminal investigation, you're going to be required to give ID. This should be common sense, but for a lot of people, it's not, unfortunately. The real clear reason you would not need to provide ID is that you're not encountering law enforcement for any lawful reason. There's no reason to stop you. They can strike up a conversation with you and they can ask for your ID anytime they want. This is a free country. And they can ask who you are. That's allowable. But you're not required, just in the course of normal conversation with a police officer, to provide identifying information. If they have to have a lawful reason over here on the clear side, right, is what we're talking about. And if it's not on the clear side and it's the complete opposite and you have nothing to do with anything, then no, why would you be required to give ID? It's almost kind of silly to talk about this because this sort of like doesn't exist. There's real no normal situations where cops are going to randomly pick people out in public and say, hey, give me your ID. So there's really not a lot going on over here. Again, if we follow common sense, that we would be worried about, should I have to give an officer my ID over here? Because it should be very clear that this is not a situation in which I'm engaging law enforcement, so why would I be giving ID? Now in the middle, there's this big, I hesitate to call it gray area, but there's an area where we just call it like, it depends. Because you may be asked for ID and it may be beneficial for you to present ID in the course of some type of early stage or criminal investigation. One example may be officers are dispatched to check on a vehicle that was just involved in a theft at a retail outlet. And it was a blue Ford Taurus with 2 white males in the front seat and 1 white female in the back seat with brown hair, shorter length. And officers arrive to the area, they start checking, and they pull over a vehicle that matches that description. Now, that's all the information they have so far. So do they have the right to stop that vehicle? Absolutely. Do they have reasonable suspicion that this could be the vehicle involved in that theft? Yep, a crime has occurred. They're investigating that. Now, this is that gray area. If they ask for the ID, if you were involved in the theft, you're going to be required to give that. If you weren't, it might be just a wise idea to just give the ID because you're innocent anyway. There's no issue there. But there's a case probably where the officer is going to be protected by the law because he has reasonable suspicion to ask for that ID to see who you are compared to who they're saying committed the theft. Because everything matches this description at a reasonable suspicion stage of the investigation. There's also a case for the person in the backseat who would say, no, I don't feel comfortable giving you my ID because I have nothing to do with whatever it is that you think we did. So both parties have a reasonable expectation for the same exact request that they're having. One to not give it, one to ask for it. So that stuff is hashed out in court, and that's like at the early point of an investigation. But criminal investigations start at the point of no reasonable suspicion, then reasonable suspicion, then probable cause, and then we're talking about an arrest is made or not made, an investigation is underway, and certain witnesses or certain people may be required to give ID or it will be considered obstruction. So there is no like one answer to that because there's like this arc of it depends at what point. And that's not me avoiding an answer to your question. There are just so many situations and so many variables that the answer to the question, when do you have to provide ID to a cop, there's a real simple answer. When you're stopped and engaged with the police officer for a legal reason or during the course of a clear criminal investigation, you may be required to give ID, provide ID. And then you've got the extreme opposite where you have nothing to do with the situation. And then you've got all this stuff about the real world that happens in between. So this is maybe not the answer you were looking for because it's not as like perfectly clear cut all the time. If you have follow-up questions, drop them in the comments. And again, we'll get to that. I've droned on and on enough. I think my beard actually grew like a centimeter while I talked. So good day.